The universe loves balance, the push and pull of celestial bodies, the fight between light and dark, even the creation and nourishment of life. We discovered as much during our expansion into the stars, but balance is a trap, a lie. I fear we may have learned this too late. Our enemy was known to us, had been known to us for centuries. Initial contact had resulted in a bloody, century-long war. Inevitable, some would say, as they found us as repulsive as we found them repugnant. I've seen the recordings. I've watched as our leaders, and theirs, met to formalize an agreement, feathered wings on scaled paws, watched as drones were deployed in a seemingly infinite line across space, forever dividing them from us. It still fills me with shame to visit our halls of remembrance. Millions of lives lost, billions of individuals impacted, and the end result was, you stay on your side, and we'll stay on ours. They deserved more. We deserved more. But life has settled into a routine in the intervening years. I stand guard at the gate, the only sanctioned meeting ground between our two empires. For decades, that routine had gone untested. We would meet once every 8 rotations to allow the diplomats to discuss various matters of state. We would posture and postulate. We would swap data on drone deployment to ensure that the relative size of our empires had not changed. Because apparently our infinities had to remain equal. Or else, what was the point? Routine is boring and tedious, full of long days and little stimulation. I miss routine. Unable to locate Flight Group 35C. I stared at the words in consternation. I had just run our routine scan of my assigned sector. A secret scan, of course. They had no idea we tracked their ships, or believed that their technology protected them from detection. I'm sure we believed the same. But that group of ships had been in the same sector, doing the same thing, aka nothing, for over a year. None of our ships had moved position or altered themselves in any way, so there was no reason for their ships to have moved. But they were gone. I ran the scan 3 more times to be sure, and every scan returned the same result. Flight Group 35C had disappeared. This was new and dangerous. I logged the change but knew that my superiors would dismiss it as an anomaly. And there was a universe of valid reasons. Resupply, repair, crew rotation, and perhaps even a cultural or religious celebration. For all we knew, they could be crowning a new emperor. Our knowledge of their tactics and weaponry was matched only by our ignorance of their culture and current events. But as much disquiet as this caused me, panic did not begin for nearly another 16 rotations. Commander! I burst into the command bubble, results from the latest scan in my hand. Captain Front, you seem to be frazzled. The statement was made with wry humor. I knew how I looked. I had sprinted from my captain's chair to his command deck as soon as the results had come back. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I've just had the results back. Sorry, just a moment, Captain. Commander Hayon turned to standing crew member. Do you have what I asked for? Sir, sorry, but... No, sir. The kitchen informs me that that particular type of tea plant went extinct nearly a decade ago, sir. The crew member replied apologetically. Hayon motioned lazily to the air. Ah, yes, well, very good. Thank you for checking. He turned back to me. I'm sorry, Front, what were you saying? Sir, Fleet 7, all of Fleet 7, has disappeared from all scans. We have no idea where they went. I believe we should reposition, potentially call in reinforcements from the Thundering Group fleet until we can be certain that this is not a preface to invasion. Hayone looked up sharply at the suggestion. Call on Admiral Kanya and his shiny new fleet? And for what? A fleet that isn't where it was? You know as well as I that they occasionally reshuffle their fleets. Or maybe they have some internal strife that needs quashing. Pirates or the like. Void knows we've done that before. Hayone paused for a moment, a knowing look on his face, before turning his back to me. It is my official recommendation that we continue to monitor the situation, and should the need arise, then we can consider reaching out to our oh-so-esteemed fleet commanders. Now you there. I have another tea variety I'd like you to track down for me. Oh, you're dismissed, Front. Hayone continued to speak with the crew member about long-extinct tea strands, while I stood, staring in disbelief. It was always the joke in the service that duty at the gate was for screw-ups and old commanders who never made it to Admiral and just wanted to ride out the last few years of their careers. I had been sent because of an operation that cost the life of the son of the regional governor. Taken by pirates and killed during a rescue attempt. My rescue attempt. It was common knowledge, and Hayone's subtle jab was a not-so-subtle reminder of why I was here. Penance. Still, as I trekked back to my own ship and my own crew, the disappearance of the fleet worried me. It weakened their defenses and made them vulnerable. Unless this was a trap to invite invasion. Something was wrong within the enemy's empire. Status report, comms. Anything unusual going on over on the other side? I asked curiously. I'd had our scan crew decrease the intervals between scans, hoping to catch some form of pattern. So far, nothing had stood out. Nothing big, sir. Still, no sign of Fleet 7. But no other changes that I would deem important. My claws chewed the cloth on my seat as I thought. Something was there. I could feel it, but it eluded my grasp. Very good. Please, send me the raw data for the last 2 revolutions from our sector, as well as the data from as many sectors as you can get your paws on. Something is going on here. I muttered the last part to myself. The information came through quickly. Some of the other captains had refused to send their data, but enough had that comparisons could be made. At first, there seemed to be nothing. No real changes, and any individual change could be easily explained away. But going through the results again and again, something emerged. Not a pattern per se, but a program. Ships being siphoned off. It had started nearly a revolution prior. A ship here, a ship there. No one fleet group was heavily targeted, and the choice of ship seemed almost random in nature. One group lost a couple of old supply ships. Another lost a destroyer and troop carrier. Another group had lost nearly all of its corvettes. Once all the disappearances from each fleet were tallied, they had siphoned away nearly 2 whole fleets before the disappearance of the entirety of Fleet 7. Shivers caused my tail to curl reflexively. 3 fleet groups. 3 egg-breaking fleet groups stashed somewhere out there in the void. There were only 2 options: civil war or war. I pored over the data again and added detail where I could. I knew Hayone wouldn't want to hear this. He wanted to retire, to not worry anymore. I needed my case to be indisputable. He wouldn't be able to ignore me this time. I slammed my claw into my desk hard enough to leave gouges. Hayone had not only ignored my recommendations, he had warned me that any further such warmongering claims would earn me a note in my records for unbecoming conduct. He refused to see the threat that, at least in my eyes, stood stark before us. I collapsed back into my hammock. If the information I had brought him had not convinced Hayone, nothing would. I resolved to continue documenting the changes in pattern and procedure on the off chance I was ever hauled in front of the tribunal for failure to do my duty. Though by that point I doubted the efficacy of evidence. Scapegoats are not often granted that luxury. The next half-revolution brought further changes. The first was an exponential increase in cargo traffic. Massive shipments arriving from who knows where in their empire began arriving almost daily. I raised the idea that such haulers were bringing in armaments and likely troops, an idea that was promptly ignored, vigorously ignored. We watched as our enemy docked cargo ships that no doubt were bringing in weapons and troops trained specifically to destroy my people. It was a bitter pill to swallow. My fortune, if you could call it that, began to change not long after. Over the span of nearly 100 rotations, we became accustomed to seeing cargo haulers and flurries of activity from the other fleet groups. Then it stopped. All of it. Cargo ships simply stopped arriving one day, and their fleets stopped performing strange jump sequences. No more activity around their central docking station. No more unexpected disappearances. It was as if a button had been pressed, and everything that had happened over the last almost 2 revolutions was forgotten. This, more than anything, seemed to frighten Hyon. Perhaps because it seemed that whatever they had been doing, they had done. Their preparations were finished. I began to receive requests for data. Data on fleet restructurings, cargo data, and personal activity. I sent what I had and waited. I knew Hyon would become desperate, perhaps only to ensure he did not bear the brunt of the anger about to befall our fleet. But while I waited, the request for personal information had tickled something in my brain. I began to watch our now daily scans more closely. Everything seemed normal. Every patrol moved along the path we expected them to move along. Every repair or refit was filled as we expected, and every shuttle flew along the path they always flew. It took me a while to see it. It is always easier to spot something that has been added as opposed to something missing. But it was too perfect. Every patrol spent the exact same amount of time on their loop. Every repair and refit happened exactly when it was expected. Shuttles left at the same time, every single time. No one sapient-operated schedule is that good. There are always minor issues. Miscalibrated jumps, someone running late, a lazy captain. No one was perfect every time. I wasn't sure what was happening. It drove me crazy. Thousands of theories flying through my head every time I noticed it again. But for all we strategized, planned, and schemed, we really had no idea. No clue as to why they were doing what they were doing. And it kept me up at night, worried that I had missed some vital clue that would spell the doom of my people. It was after a night filled with such thoughts that I snapped. My eyes opened of their own accord, still heavy from lack of sleep, but my mind raced. A plan that must have lain half-thought had sprouted overnight into a full course of action. I rose and dressed quickly, set off for the flight deck. No one stopped me. I glared at anyone who thought to speak. They got the message. Arriving at the flight deck, I donned a flight suit, calmly climbed into one of our more trustworthy fighters, and ordered them to open the doors and clear me for departure. There was some hesitancy, but this was my ship, and my crew did as they were commanded. Our fighters are good, easily better than our counterparts, but the small lever in the middle of the main console was the real reason I had taken a fighter over a transport. I entered a few coordinates, then reached out and depressed the lever. Instantly, I felt the strain associated with a jump. Fighters came with pre-charged jump coils, which were single-use only. Once the battery was dead, well, so were you. I believed I had enough to jump back, but there was always a risk. I sat, waiting, staring into the black of the void. I was exposed, no shields, no cloaking. My battery was limited. I needed to time it to get the most out of them. Suddenly, a shrieking alarm sounded in the cockpit, a warning of an imminent jump. I worked quickly to bring my cloaking only, leaving the shields off. There was a small chance the incoming fleet would detect the shield, and I didn't want to risk it. I flexed my fingers, attempting to work away the sudden nerves. The full weight of my plan crashed into me as I imagined the arrival of a full fleet of our enemy. If I was lucky, they wouldn't see me. If I was unlucky, they would just kill me. If I was even more unlucky, they wouldn't just kill me. And if I was even more... I snapped my focus to the viewport, ending my brain's unhelpful line of thinking. Then, I watched as a portal appeared. I held my breath, waiting for the enormous capital ship that routinely led the way through a jump. I wasn't prepared for a single heavy transport. The thing was more or less a flying city. Some defenses, but not nearly enough to act as a bulwark in case there was an ambush. Confusion slowed me for a moment, and as I focused again on the portal, I realized it was closing. Nothing else came through. I had no idea how to proceed. Of all the things I had expected, never had I imagined this. Knowing the risk, I decided to attempt a weak scan. It could be picked up, but I had no other better ideas. My eyes almost burst from my skull when the scan returned that there was an entire fleet in front of me despite what I was seeing. Perhaps the rest of the fleet was shielded? No, that would make no sense. Why have shields so good that they became invisible, but were so poor that even a fighter-level scan would reveal them? Though my more rational side screamed at the absurdity of it, I had a hunch and powered up to close the distance between us. I was almost in spitting distance when I saw them. Long strands cast off from the heavy transport, almost spine-like in nature. And at the end, something was blinking, a faint red light barely noticeable. But as I approached one of the lights, my scan screamed that I was getting close to an enemy corvette. The same happened with every spine. A different light, a different ship. I sat back in my chair. This fleet was gone. They had tricked us. That moment of shock almost cost me my life. I drifted too close to the transport, and before I realized what had happened, I was targeted by automated point defense systems. The fighter shook as rounds pinged off the frame, and plasma heated the exterior. I burned away from the ship, avoiding major damage, expecting a pursuit that never came. That action alone confirmed what I had begun to suspect. All of it, everything happening, was on autopilot. If a commander had been on that ship, they would not rest until they were sure they had prevented their secret from getting out. Instead, once I left the vision of the ship, it forgot about me. Hayon had to know. My arrival back at the station was almost unnoticed. Crew rushed through the halls, and my already sky-high levels of anxiety climbed as I saw the holds were filled with armed and armored Marines. They looked ready to repel boarders. I grabbed a passing mechanic by the arm. "Crewman, what is going on?" I demanded. "What? You don't know. They didn't show up." He seemed to be shocked to say the words. For the first time since the treaty, they just didn't show up. "Is it a preface to war, sir?" I hurried away, leaving the question unanswered. Hayone barely glanced up as I rushed into his office. "Where have you been?" "Never mind, it doesn't matter. We're about to face invasion, and our only options are surrender or glorious death, it seems. What do you estimate their strength at?" He directed the question to the room. Silence followed. "0, I said finally. Hayone gave me his full attention, demeanor demanding an explanation. I gave the bare-bones story of what had happened, expecting shock or, if I was being honest, a bit of admiration at my daring and hypothesis. Instead, I got stony skepticism. "Listen, Front. That is an interesting story, but for the last, revolution, you have been claiming that we are on the verge of invasion and war, and now you're saying that every sapient over there is gone. Disappeared into the night with no indication of how or when they went? Is that what you are saying, Front?" Hayone seemed on the edge of a breakdown as he directed a torrent of words at me. I breathed deeply, then forced myself to look him in the eyes. "Yes, sir." Hayone flung himself back into his chair, flinging his arms into the air. "Great. Just great. We're either poised for an invasion and a resumption of war that nearly destroyed both our people, or they're gone without any indication of how or why." A realization hit. "The haulers." "The cargo ships, sir. We assumed that they were bringing supplies in, but what if they were taking supplies out?" Hayone reached up to rub his eyes. "Yes, Front, that is an interesting theory, but do you fail to see how it helps the situation?" He finished with a yell. I nodded, chastened. Hayone breathed deeply for a moment before looking at me again. "You've been the most on top of this, Front. What do you suggest?" Plasma torches blazed as we cut into our enemy's station. Hayone had been hesitant, calling it an act of war. I reminded him that their missing the preset meeting was a violation of the treaty, and thus an act of war in itself. Ultimately, he agreed to let me take a small party over the station that mirrored ours and perform some reconnaissance. We had hailed them before getting to their station, hailed again requesting docking instructions, and then warned them before beginning the cutting station. There had been no response. And now I stood in the void as armored Marines cut into their hull. The metal screeched loudly as the Marines wrenched it away. Or, at least, I imagined it dead. Space is eerily quiet. There was no response to our trespass. Nothing, not even an outrush of atmosphere once the station was exposed to vacuum. My sense of unease intensified as we went through the massive craft. Room after room, deck after deck, there was nothing. The station was abandoned. Not a living soul in sight. Hayone was not pleased with the results, but after some convincing, he agreed to let me take a small group to push farther into enemy territory. Results did not vary. Outposts, moons, defense stations, all abandoned. 10 rotations. We moved through enemy territory for 10 rotations before we saw anything different. A fortress on a small moon. Only this one had not been abandoned. Instead, it appeared someone had decided to gift the fortress several tungsten rods delivered at a fraction of the speed of light. Only the outlying structures were recognizable. Signs of violence followed everywhere after that. My nerves were shot, but I commanded us to continue on. There was an answer here, and we would find it.
"Captain Front, sir, please come to the bridge immediately."
I had left the command chair only a few hours prior to rest and allow my second the experience, and if I was being called back. I hurried to the command room. A vision greeted me, a station lit like I had never seen before, so bright it almost hurt my eyes. Ships moved around the central hub, but with none of the smooth motion I'd grown to expect. There were sapiens here. "Captain, you've been invited aboard." I stood inside the main hall. I had been welcomed through via drone. I had yet to see a living being. Despite the long walk and the clear signs of habitation, it made my scales itch. After what felt like a lifetime, the doors opposite me slowly opened. I stood, eager to see what I had been waiting for. Several Shikan entered, but they would not meet my eyes. It took me a moment to realize that they were bound, and that I recognized them. Several were ship and fleet commanders that had been identified during recon and intelligence gathering. The final Shikan to enter was suspected by some to be the heir to the throne. Their wings were bound, their feet chained. Their short forearms had been pinned to their sides. I stared, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. A truly breathtaking civil war must have taken place, all without us knowing, for such a massive change in leadership. "Sit!" A voice, guttural, foreign, barked. The bound Shikan sat immediately. Behind them, another figure emerged. It was tall and broad and walked upright, similar to my own posture. My mind ceased to form coherent thoughts. This was not a Glazad, not a Shikan, which meant it was something new. The creature entered the room. It seemed pleased to find me so off balance. I began to realize that I did not know my enemy. Balance is a lie. "Hello," the creature growled to me. "I represent humanity." It gestured to the bound captives. "I bid you welcome to the new universal order.